Today, we're working on getting this single cab long bed shortened up to just a single cab short bed, and not the 6.5 bed that everybody uses. We are doing a true 5 3/4 bed. The easiest way to tell the difference between a 6.5 foot and a 5 3/4 foot bed is the fuel filler neck to the wheel well. But I think this will be the first how-to sort of on how to shorten this frame for that bed. So I've kind of already started on this side, but you get the axle disconnected. So you got your leaf spring bolt. You're gonna have to unbolt that one. There's one in the front. I've got the fuel tank out of this thing already. So fuel tank is sitting right there. We're gonna have to take the exhaust out of it. Drive shaft's gotta come out of it. That was already out from when I got the truck. You'll have to disconnect the brake lines and the shocks as well. Everybody's gonna have a different way of doing this, but once I have all that stuff disconnected, I like to come through and cut the rivets with a center cut through the center of them, kind of like this right here. And I just do that so that when I knock them out with the air hammer, they pop out a whole lot easier. So I'm going to get this side stripped all the way off because we need those brackets to be able to slide this thing forwards, but I'll leave this side all intact so y'all can see kind of where we start from. Now, these front two bed bolts will still line up with the factory 5 3/4 bed. However, I don't think the rest of them will. So we will end up cutting these off and we'll be using these for the rear, and we'll just do 4 bolts across the entire thing to support it. So with that, I'm going to pop these rivets off, get this side of the frame stripped, and then we'll slide it forwards and see where we're sitting at. All right, so we got these back 4 rivets cut off. We got our bracket off. We've got all of these rivets cut off except for this last one, but it should still give me the ability to just pop that off right there. We're going to use that bracket to extendo where our leaf spring perches are. We'll put a nut in it, a nut and bolt, and then we will weld that bracket back onto the frame. As for this bottom bracket, you've got 2 rivets in there. Once you get those out, it comes right off. So now you can see the frame is basically stripped all the way back except for this, because we're going to end up cutting it somewhere in that section. But now we're gonna come over to the passenger side and cut all those rivets off, cut all those rivets off, and do the same thing. All right, now it's a little bit cooler in the day. Here's where we're sitting at now. We got the leaf spring perches off, we got the bottom base off, we've got the back ones off, and the axle has been slid forwards. We've got that going on both sides. We've got the fuel tank and the exhaust. Exhaust is over there, exhaust removed. And here's what we got going on now. So, instead of trying to save all of this and undo all these rivets and everything, we are just going to do ourselves a little back cut here. And it's going to basically cut right through there. And we're going to cut all of this off the frame. With the bed gap and everything, it kind of comes back like 6 foot from the cab, which kind of puts us a little bit closer into this. So we're just going to do the mounts and slide this thing forwards. So I've already got my little outline right there. So I'm going to go through and cut this back section off. Once this back section is cut off, I'll get the bed set on top of here and we'll start trying to figure out where we're going to center the axle with the whole thing. And with that, we have shortened the back of the frame. We gotta get the axle figured out. Removed a little bit over 2 feet of frame rail, and I'm gonna take this fuel cell and put it right in this area. But for right this very second, I'm going to clear all of this crap out of my way, and I'm going to pick that bed up and set it onto that frame. And now that it is officially dark out, I went through and set the bed on the back of this thing. And let me tell y'all, this thing is short. Like, you just look at that bed and you're like, not a whole lot of space there. But that is what we are looking for this challenge. This right here is all weight reduction, and this is also the ability to transfer weight from up there onto that. Tomorrow we will get the suspension stuff figured out, and then I will measure for a drive shaft. All right, so day 2 of building the Poor Diesel Challenge truck. I've got the front end picked up. We are pulling the torsion key bolts out of this thing. My goal is to get this front end to sit as low as we possibly can, and I want to see if we can clear the wheels. So first bolt's out, I'm gonna pull the other bolts out. We have got the jack stand sitting on the back of the frame, kind of questionably now. I'm gonna take this fuel tank and I'm going to mount it probably up underneath there. I have to figure out what I'm doing with this drive shaft situation. It's not exactly the best. But once I get that front end set all the way down as low as we can get it right now with just the keys out of it, we can go ahead and mount that rear axle up so it has basically flat, maybe a little bit of rake to it, and then we can do the drive shaft. Guess we can also mount the rear end at that point. I'm kind of just focusing on getting the front end set up so that it sits where we need it to sit at. Torsion key bolt right here, put your thing on it and just boom, done. That is as low as she's gonna go. All right, so we have the bed off of this thing, and I've taken my leaf spring perch and I've cut it down to just the 4 bolts. These trucks are designed to tow like a crap ton because they're diesels. However, for such a short wheelbase, we're not really gonna be towing a whole lot of anything, so those 4 bolts will work. And then for the leaf springs, we got the leaf springs out of it because we're going to take all but 2 of the leaves in there, and I might leave the load leaf on it. I think I'm gonna leave the load leaf on it in case we decide to tow like the little 16-foot trailer. But y'all get the idea. We've already got the ends cut off. I've got, you know, the jacks moved to the back of the frame, and this leaf is unbolted. I'm gonna have to do something about that drive shaft, but we're making pretty good progress, all things considered. Well, it's basically the end of day 2, and here's where we're sitting at with the truck. I think I've got the rear suspension figured out, how I'm gonna mount the shackle in the front, how I'm gonna mount the shackle in the back. I've got the leaf springs torn into 2. So I took 2 leaf springs out of it and the load spring. The drive shaft is still an issue, and I haven't even touched this side, so I still have to redo this spring, make the mount, and then I'm gonna take that fuel cell and I'm gonna put it here in the back underneath the bed. I've got some angle iron to kind of recess that down into the frame. Plus, we got the topside vents, so I got some 90s to be able to push that forwards. My plan on the front here is we've got where the leaf spring mounts, but underneath it, we're gonna use this to mount where our traction bar goes, so it's all relatively close and local. And that way, as the axle tries to wrap, it'll push up onto here, which will drive the frame. That's the theory anyways on that. As for the shocks, I'm gonna see if I can't flip that mount around and then just mount it to the back of this bar so that the bar is driving it down. And then for this side, we've already got the rear mount done. I just gotta make a mount up here where the bar is, and that's how that shock will work. We had some parts come in today. I got the adapters. These are 1.5, whereas the ones that I've got it right now that are off of the 67 are 2-inch, so this will bring it in a little bit more. The front end of the truck didn't lower as much as I thought it was going to, being that the bolts are completely pulled out of the torsion bars. So I might try flipping the springs or doing something else to get this to sit lower. I gotta figure out what I'm doing with the fuel lines because the return line is still gonna work and the feed line is gonna have to feed the whole motor. So I'm hoping when I make the mount for the back of the fuel tank that I can kind of set it in this area, and then I can have the air dog sitting somewhere basically right in here, and it'll feed to the return. The return from the motor will come to there. The fuel line will come out, run through the frame rail, all the way up to the feed. I think the air dog harness will reach from the fuse box all the way to the back of the truck. And I think that'll be it as far as the outside of all of this stuff goes. Basically, once I have all the suspension and everything finalized, I will roll this thing into the garage. Once it's in the garage, we'll do the motor and trans, but I want to do all of the cutting and grinding and beating on it with an air hammer and whatnot out here where all of the dirt and stuff will fall to the ground. It's easily cleaned up, whereas in the garage, it takes a little bit more time and nobody likes rolling around on that crap. So tomorrow, I think we'll be done with everything as far as getting this bed set onto that frame. Just trying to get everything finalized. The drive shaft, I'm not worried about. I can put that in from underneath, but something like the fuel tank, I don't think that'll be easily accessible from underneath. Obviously the feeds and the returns will be, but I'm not trying to work on it in a tight spot if I don't have to. Well, I've basically finished everything up with making this thing into a short bed minus putting the actual physical bed on it. So let me show you what I got going on. So what I ended up doing to make this thing a short bed was, you know, obviously we unmounted the entire leaf spring mount. I cut it at an angle, so I cut the whole leaf spring mount, flipped it 190 degrees, and just welded it into the frame. The rear bed mount sits like, what is that, a ½ an inch from where I ended up welding this in at, so that I'd have a plate to be able to weld in where the traction bar went. So that's how I did the front half of it. And then for the rear half, we just popped the rivets out, and then I took 4 bolts and bolted the back of the leaf spring in. I didn't like cut and shorten the frame or anything. What I ended up doing was just cutting the back of the frame off and sliding the whole axle and stuff forwards. And because I'm using traction bars, I used the factory cross member that's already right here and we switched this over to Ranger shocks, so it's not the most perfect thing in the world, but they work pretty good. I just cut the shock mount off of that side, welded it, geez, back onto this side, and then just went and got a set of Ranger shocks. You can probably use the standard 2500 HD shock, but this shock is longer than what I needed it to be, and this is also a really stiff shock, so for something as short as what this is kind of like overkill. Plus these I think are bad. I also broke that one at UCC, so I needed shocks anyways. And then I just welded a tab right there, used the factory lower mount. As for the fuel cell, I made a kind of like a brace down here at the bottom, so it's got a channel that it rides on, and then I got two squares that come up and it's bolted into where the factory frame is. And then I took where the fuel feed and where the fuel return would have been and just plumb that into what I got going on back here. So being that I have an air dog, the feed comes out of here, goes directly into the pump then feeds it all the way up to the motor, return comes back, and then it tees off with the air dog return, goes back into the tank. I use a 20-gallon tank, set it in the back, trying to get as much weight to the back of this thing as we can. That seems to work pretty good. If you follow the UCC stuff, the Poor Diesel Challenge, I ended up having to get a drive shaft made. The idea of cutting it yourself and doing it, not a great idea. Plus reusing U-joints, very bad idea. And then as far as physically mounting the bed onto what is left of the frame, the factory long bed front bolts work the same, and then I just drilled the backs of the frame with 2 holes to be able to use the back of the bed. If I were to go back and do this again, I would probably add myself in a step notch or a C-channel or something to be able to raise where the axle sits in this thing. It's not exactly terrible, but that frame will hit that axle. So I've got some drop spindles coming for the front of this thing to hopefully get the back to match up. I'd already taken it down to just 2 leaves plus the traction bar, so it's kind of what it looks like. I do have a 2-degree shim in it. I don't know if the 2-degree shim is actually needed, but I put it in there because it seemed to help with the driveline vibration that we had going on. It might not mean anything, it might mean something, I don't know, but it's got a 2 or 2.5 degree billet shim to be able to raise the pinion up to be able to get more pinion angle out of that for the drive shaft. As for the brake line, I literally just bent it back around and hooked it back up into the axle. The right thing to do would be to cut that line somewhere like right in there, and then you can bring it over, flare it, put that fitting back on it, and you get rid of all the extra line. However, just be able to bend it kind of back around and put it behind that shock worked out. Literally just comes out right there, boop, drops down, and you're done. I did have to delete what was left for the hanger in that cross member. When I switched the drive shaft, it's just a 1-piece now, so it's got the slip yoke in the actual drive shaft, so that carrier bearing doesn't matter anymore, and it actually is in the way of where the drive shaft for a 1-piece sits. So I think that's all there really is to it. Cut the back of the frame off, slide the whole axle and perches and everything forwards like 18 or 20 inches. It's a lot. And then you can kind of adjust this to whatever your profession is. You know, if you don't feel like flaring brakes and all that stuff, boop, wrapping around. One thing that I will recommend doing is, since you got rid of the big cross member that sits in the back here that kind of holds everything together, the only thing that's left is that one cross member. So I'm going to come in with a trailer hitch from that frame rail to this frame rail to try to give the back of that frame a little bit more structure, because, well, it's just 2 open frame rails with that one brace sitting right there. So yeah, I'm gonna throw this bed onto that, and then you have yourself a short bed Duramax. Short bed. It does need cab bushing, so that's why that body mount right there is kind of a little bit foobar. But if we look underneath here, you can see that cab mount right there, or the bed mount originally that was on this thing, lines right up with that bed. If this thing will focus, boop, right on into there. And then basically we got just the ones that are on the frame right in there, the other one back there, and then basically the same deal up over here. It just boop. I don't know if you saw anything in that, but there's how the bed mounts back onto the frame. If you wanted to get creative with it, you could cut those bed mounts off and slide them forwards to go onto that rung right there. Same thing for kind of the rear. However, it is a short bed Duramax. 4 bolts is all I'm going to use to hold that bed in place. Obviously, the gas cap doesn't do anything anymore. We have ourselves a hole in the bed to fill it with fuel. I'm gonna get a little bed door or something to put on top of that to cover over it. And then as far as the wiring is concerned, use your factory deal. It plugs in to that connection right there, and then these 2 bed connections will plug into it. Something kind of like that right there, and then you can hang it up somewhere with all this other wiring and whatnot, and that'll get your taillights working. And then there you have it, short bed Duramax. I need to get some cab mounts for this. I have 2-inch drop spindles coming to lower the front of this a little bit more so it kind of matches the rear. I actually kind of like the way that the big tire and little tire looks. I don't know why, but that tire fills that whole thing in pretty good, and then the height balances out. Anywho, that's not what we're doing with this thing. And then if you had like a normal tailgate, that would literally just go right in, and then you could drill the frame for the rear bumper brackets, and then you could put a bumper on the back of this thing. I was probably gonna put a roll pan on the back of it, but right now I'm not doing anything with the back of it. It's just gonna stay like that. So next up, I'm going to work on converting this thing over to the Cadillac seats, swap that steering wheel out, swap that entire dash out, get rid of these ugly tan door panels, get rid of these hand crank windows, and go to power windows. Y'all already know I got the Cadillac seats for this thing. Got the Cadillac center console, we got the power door panels, and then we got all the trim to go with it. So that'll possibly be on the next episode. We'll see what happens.